Welcome to Chief Evangelist. I'm your host, Ethan Beute. I'm on a mission to explore and understand the role of the Chief Evangelist and the movement behind it. How should CEOs be thinking about it? How does it benefit the company? Which companies and markets need evangelism most? What is the work involved? What does success look like? And who's a good fit as a Chief Evangelist? That's what we're exploring at chiefevangelist.com and in conversations like this one. Today, we're learning from the Head Evangelist at Databricks. He's also served as Global AI Evangelist and Director of AI Evangelism and Strategy at DataRobot. Fun fact, he's done analytics work for the Baltimore Orioles, San Diego Padres, Montreal Expos, and Chicago Cubs. Ari Kaplan, welcome to Chief Evangelist.
Hey, Ethan, so nice to be here, and welcome to the audience listening.
Yeah, welcome to everyone. I'm really glad we're here. I'm looking forward to this. I enjoyed our initial conversation. There's so much going on in data analytics and specifically AI. We'll probably get into some depths that I'm not quite comfortable with, and I'm excited about that with regard to the technology and the market and what's going on. But we'll start, Ari, where we always do, which is around this concept of evangelism. For you, when you reflect on your roles, including your current one, what do you think is the most important job of an evangelist?
Yeah, great question, and probably why people are initially tuning in. And I would say there are different roles and priorities for different sizes of companies. You know, the traditional evangelism, people think of as thought leadership. So that's the building the brand, to bigger markets, to associate your company, in my case, Databricks, with innovation, with leadership, with some unique value. So things like speaking at conferences or doing blogs or social media. But then there's other areas, depending on the company size and how the team is structured. But the other is, how do you get this word out about your company to an audience that may not have ever heard of you? So one way is through influencers. Another way could be through industry analysts like Gartner and Forrester and IDC and others, as well as getting your partners. If you have a big partnership approach, how can you get them to talk about either jointly or just solely talk about what your company is doing? So every time a Microsoft, a Google, Amazon, Meta talks about us, it goes out to an audience who may not have heard of us at all. And then probably the fourth bucket is really customer engagement. So how do you get specific, like very key accounts and engage them at more of a relationship building level, a non-sales approach, just so you could be that thought leader, the art of the possible. So really those four: thought leadership, analyst, partners, and customer engagement.
Really good. And I especially appreciate where you kind of wound down there around the art of the possible. I think that's really a key, especially in innovative spaces, which I think there's a positive correlation and association between appointing evangelists and innovation and innovative spaces, because there is a lack of understanding, a lack of clarity, certainly the brand awareness piece that you spoke about as well. For you personally, like just in the various roles you've had in evangelism, any of those buckets or anything associated with those buckets that light you up most, like when you feel most alive and most like you're fulfilling your responsibility as an evangelist, like what does that look like for you? Like, what are some of the things you're doing? Like, for example, do you prefer going to conferences and networking and speaking, or do you prefer the more internally oriented work? Like what brings you alive in this area?
I love meeting with people. I love hearing stories, interfacing with people. I love free flow thoughts. So sometimes you have like an executive briefing meeting, which is very specific to business, or it could be very creative. Sometimes it could be going to dinner or going to a sporting event, and you just like free flow ideas. And sometimes that's the best way things come about. And it's a different mindset. I was just watching a Beatles documentary 2 nights ago, and to just see like Paul McCartney, they were under a deadline to make a song, and if you're under pressure, you may or may not be successful, but he just started strumming and like these incredible songs, Let It Be, just like comes out. And if you don't have that free flow, and that free flow I see is when I actually talk with people. I do love getting up on stage and doing keynotes since I in person, so I could see their reaction and hang out after the presentation and, just talk. And it's all about, people want to tell their story. They want to, impress upon you what they're doing, and sometimes super incredible stories. Just last week, I was at HIMSS with Databricks, and one of our customers explained how he was querying data with a trillion, with the letter T, a trillion records, and it would take just a couple of minutes to come up with insights. And having come from Oracle back in the day when I started my career, to have that data incredible. And even post-Oracle with Hadoop, that would be like a multi-million-dollar environment to serve up. And now I think he said $109 was all it cost. So scalability is incredible. And I would not have gotten that just being in my room, like watching YouTube videos. That kind of pulled out extraneously. And I love that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think of what you're talking about. I don't think of it this transactionally, but I think about a lot of these experiences you're talking about in the zone of like raw material. Like you hear something and sometimes it's immediately obvious, like, oh, I know I need to share this with these two other people. They're going to love this insight. In other cases, its immediate use isn't obvious, but as you're kind of, again, I think of it as like collecting threads and things, and then eventually you're going to make a new cloth of these various pieces. I think of a lot of that as kind of raw material for something not yet communicated, but I know that it's an important part of the story, or it makes me think about something I've been dwelling on for a while differently. Right. So like you've been thinking about this thing, you're trying to figure out am I going to make a video about this? Am I going to write this up? Like, where does this go? Is this a presentation or a kernel of a presentation? And you're just waiting for that extra piece or something. And so some of that raw material tips it and all of a sudden becomes obvious. I agree with you that in-person open conversation, I think that's probably why I'm doing this podcast, is that I just so enjoy reacting and interacting to people's stories. And with that, I'd love to go back a little bit. I mean, you have a deep, deep background in data and analytics. It's made its way into AI. I think there's a natural thread there, but I don't know what it is as someone kind of ignorant and really on the consumer side of these things in a very mainstream way. Talk about your background. Like, how did you wind up in this zone? What lights you up about it? And then maybe from there, we'll kind of talk through your career progression into evangelism at DataRobot and then Databricks. But start with like, what lights you up about all this stuff? How'd you wind up here?
Yeah, I love innovation. I love trying to improve the world, heal the world in whatever way I can. And AI, machine learning, data science is something that I've been doing. It sounds trite, but since I was a little kid, when I was 7 years old, started writing and selling video games, and then started doing, which is nowhere near large language models. It was like on a TRS-80 basic, but programs that would write poems to try to see how realistic could it be. And we could talk about career progression, but along the way became president of the Worldwide Oracle User Group with 22,000 members, and helping on stage with Larry Ellison and others, big data at the time for relational database. And then the world kind of shifted, data warehousing, cloud, analytics on structured data. And then, more recently, insights and more predictive analytics on semi-structured and unstructured data. And then continuing along the way, you have social media, you have incredibly, fantastically large data sets that over 85% of the data and almost all of it is completely unused. So we could delve a little bit into that, but kind of going backwards, Databricks, I am excited since the first role of somebody full-time doing evangelism, so helping get to shape what that looks like. But people aren't familiar with Databricks. Look it up. that and alone is super exciting, regardless of what role I end up. But it feels like we created this whole new industry called the Lakehouse, which it takes the best of data warehousing and the best of data lakes, unstructured and structured, under one umbrella. That's arguably, depending on what you're doing, 5-10 times as fast and 5 to 10 times as less expensive. And like all the goods assembled with it. It's taking off. It's also based on open source. So if you want to geek out, our founders created some of the most wildly successful open source. If you've heard of Spark, ML Flow, which gets 10 million, now more than 10 million downloads every single month. So prior companies I've been in, they have like 1,000 customers. So you're talking tens of millions of downloads across the open source from our founders every month. It's the scale of that is incredible. So it's innovative. The world's changing super quickly. I love personally being at the inflection point where, like, once everyone's doing something, it's a little bit boring for me. I like to be towards something rapidly growing that adds value. And already there's a product where when you get people excited, they could actually do something. So that's kind of where, Databricks is more towards the mature side, since they've had a lot of solutions. But, it's, we could talk about large language models, but we're right at the epicenter, which is something where we weren't a few months ago.
Super interesting. First of all, I love that language of Lakehouse, the idea of the intersection of data warehouse and data lakes and structured and unstructured. Super smart. Like, just from a branding perspective, the Lakehouse, like, first of all, everyone kind of wants a lake house, In addition, it's just such a beautiful pairing of those two much more commonly used phrases. And so I think I want at some point to get into this idea of community and community groups and user groups. I think that's an interesting piece. It reminds me of the conversation on this show with Guy Kawasaki about the earliest Mac groups which were not 22,000 members, but this idea of, you see community led everywhere now. And we've even had a conversation about it specifically as a kind of a go-to-market motion on this show. But it's not new. It's just the way that we're executing it that's new. So we'll maybe get into that. I think I already feel your passion and excitement for it. And you already articulated this idea of being at the edge of things. It's an organization of, 5,000 plus people. This is the first evangelist role. To your knowledge, what was going on for them and what was going on in the market where they said, you know what, let's put someone in an evangelist position? What was the origin story there?
Yeah, it was a good confluence, and I see a lot of companies start. Everyone's different, but start hiring head of evangelism. Anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people. One thing is we have super strong leadership. If you go to Glassdoor, our leaders, are legends, and will be even more legendary. Something like a 98% approval rating. From the Glassdoor perspective, leaders, but the company has been growing really quickly. I hear just a few years ago, it was like 2,000 people. So you need to really scale up like the messaging. Also, another thing is, sometimes the marketing and go-to-market is very technical based. And in Databricks, it's a great strength, since once you get your hands on it and you see, we are 1/10 the cost. Again, not all cases, but we're much less. Just say 1/10 the cost, and you are the technical person, and you see that. That's a strong, powerful thing to say. But to the earlier part of artificial intelligence, of how people don't quite understand it, there also needs to be a way to speak more to the executive, non-technical people. So, Databricks wants to do both: speak to the technical, speak to the, what's the art of the possible? What are the use cases? Why do I care if something's 10 times as fast or 1/10 the cost if I don't quite know what it is? So, like, how can you, just explain in simple terms. Richard Feynman, one of my idols, Nobel laureate in physics, was very good at just explaining things, in simple ways that people resonate, storytell. I think that was the genesis of, we have technical, let's broaden it. We're 2.5 times the size we were, and we have to smartly grow and build our brand.
Super. So you're about a half a year into this initiative, as are they. You were in this together with Databricks, obviously. What were some of the original goals or targets or work zones? Like when it's like, okay, Ari, we're doing this. This is what we would like you to do. And was it like, go figure out what you should be doing? Or was it, we have a few ideas? Or was it, let's talk about it and we'll come to some agreements? Like, kind of, what are you doing day to day, week to week, month to month, and how did that develop? Is that self-generated? Was some of it, or was it co-created with whomever thought that this was the thing that you all needed to do?
Yeah, it was largely co-created. My prior company at DataRobot, showed that there's a lot of success with that evangelist role, especially around data and AI. And we had different execution. So, I could take a lot of what learned, both succeeding and not succeeding, and hopefully apply that to a much larger scale. So coming on board, it was kind of the idea of those 4, main buckets coming in. And, for sure, the core is that thought leadership, webinars, podcasts, speaking at events, writing blogs, trying to get us on social. That's kind of like foundational. And then the rest, you kind of come and see it. It all depends, like how willing are the partners. Some partners I've had in prior companies where it's a ton of work and nothing gets done after a year, and others, an incredible amount gets done. I've had successes where I've gotten partner to retweet something, and before you know it, Mark Benioff and Salesforce retweets it, and you have 10 million views on this blog, which is kind of organic. So, there's like the foundational bedrock, and then there is like potential growth on top of it. And I think, everyone who is a head of evangelism or aspiring that's listening is, you have to be agile. So Databricks, this week, we had our largest attended webinar in our company history, since we are front and center of this large language model phenomenal interest. 2 months ago, that wasn't like much on our radar. So, everyone has to be agile. The markets change really quickly. Hopefully you're at a company where you have innovative products that you could, pivot a little bit. You always want to have something that you're successful and repeatable, but pivot part of the way along it. So a year from now, I'm sure I'll be focusing on different things. So for me, it's like to have repeatable process where I'm elevating, whether it's a salesperson or marketing. Like once I figure out like, how do you say something that resonates pretty well? How do you define a lake house, what the value is? I want 1,000 of our sales reps to kind of repeat that mantra.
How do you spend your time internally versus externally? I mean, you've already mentioned that you're traveling, but you've also just said something that is super critical. I mean, whether it's 1,000 salespeople or whether it's 10 salespeople, the idea of taking what you're already testing in an active and engaged manner and teaching it back internally. How much time do you spend focused internally on the team that's there, either for learning yourself or for teaching?
Yeah, great question. It depends month to month. So I, spent a bit of time, probably the first couple months, getting up to speed. We have pretty robust product line. It's one platform, but there's 6 different offerings, and now Dolly. So wanted to come up to speed first, and then speak not in the public eye, but with customers and partners, and really drill down, like, here's our marketing spiel, what's real, what's not. So I kind of took that approach to get my opinion and get my heart into it and speak with customers, go on site to a couple people and have them walk through things for like an entire day. But now that that's through, yeah, I spend a lot of my time now, like I'm going to Stockholm to be one of the keynotes at this Data Innovation Summit, which is super exciting. But so I'm finalizing what do I want my personal, TED Talk like thing to sound like, in a non-sales inspirational perspective. Starting to write and produce some blogs, potentially starting it looks like we'll be starting a podcast. So those are kind of like the planning and execution phases. So I'm now shifting from learning to executing. Love being on this podcast as well. That's part of the execution. So yeah, it really depends on that. Databricks has a really good internal, like almost no meeting is a wasted meeting. There's incredible transparency from the top down, and right now we're all together figuring out. We have something called DALL-E, DOLLY, which is large language model. It's taking a tremendous, in a good way, amount of attention. But we also have $1 billion plus business on our traditional lake house. So how do we embrace this new attention while also growing that $1 billion business?
I love it. What a joy to be at the intersection of these things and trying to figure out the best way to communicate it, have access to relationships you've already built or new relationships that you're building to kind of test some of this stuff out, to bring it back internally. I really see that as a consistent theme throughout all these conversations, and it looks a little bit different in each one of them, but it really is around this, like, it's not marketing, it's not sales. It supports marketing, it supports sales. It's customer driven. It's also true to the internal, values perspective. Like I can already tell the respect and reverence with which you're speaking of the leadership of the organization, that you appreciate the values that they're operating by. And I can't imagine that doesn't come through as you're connecting and communicating with other people explicitly and implicitly. How, for you, is, again, I know generally it's in a co-created zone, but are you setting your own goals, like what you want to have done by, the end of the summer? Are you saying yes and no to different opportunities? Or are you, we've had this conversation on the show too, you say yes to everything until your dance card is too full, and then you start getting more selective? Like, where are you in that zone in terms of creating and vetting and evaluating opportunities for how you spend your time?
Yeah, that's something, I always strive to get better, which is saying no. I was born, what some people call empathetic, people pleaser in a way, but, just to do partnership alone, you can have a team of full-time evangelists just doing partnership relationships, which is probably about just 10% of my time right now. So you could very easily, over 5,000 employees, you get pegged out. So, you want to say yes to tasks that are repeatable, that are, complementary or unique compared to what other people are doing. And I'm just thinking, personally, I want the company to go IPO. I want to, personally benefit, but I want to be part of that experience as well, going through that big process and creating some industry. So I want us to succeed. So my brain is always thinking, what will have the biggest impact that I could do? Like what, we have small partners that may make sense to work with, but if I get Amazon to speak about us in the social media, then maybe that's something that's worthwhile. If I'm about to do a webinar and I think it'll be 500 people showing up or 5,000, that kind of helps. Or if I'm creating like this, like just today, I got a proposal for like a new, TED Talk / inspirational webinar. And I, just have to make that decision. how much time will it take for me to develop it? But if it is developed, is it repeatable? Is it something I can give to other like mini evangelists, non-full-time evangelists, that they can spread the word? And in this case, I think the answer is yes, but I anticipate like 20 hours of work to get it really well done and create the deck and create perhaps a demo with that. But yeah, I constantly have to say no. Otherwise, it's we have more than we have like I think 9,000 customers. If I do one a day, that's 30 years. Can't quite scale up that way.
Yeah, really good. Gosh, you've mentioned several key words. You're obviously teaching these materials. You also mentioned that part of the evangelism role is to bring this message to non-technical folks. So I'm asking as one of those non-technical folks for the audience, because these are and for me, because these are such big and consequential shifts in the way things are being done. The implications are vast. I would love for you to spend a few minutes separating what's real from what's hype, or, just kind of because as someone who spends time on social media, primarily for communicating the things I care about around human connection and across the digital divide through, but not limited to, video messaging, you can't scroll past 4 posts without seeing some other new expert on how they're going to, 10x your business by tomorrow using Chat GPT or something. Kind of just dumb down generative AI. Where is it? What is actually happening? The basics of large language models and the relationship there. Just kind of like break it down as you would break it down for someone who is not anywhere near the technical space.
Yeah, since the last 10 years, there's been much bigger adoption in the enterprise and companies of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And to me, that is taking information that you have and making a prediction, something that happened in the past to predict the future, or what will our sales be based on human behavior, for example, in addition to just numbers. So that's where one thing of AI is this forward-looking prediction. Another is classification. So is this player going to be drafted to the majors? Yes or no? Will this particular medicine be effective to cure in this specific person a disease? What type of persona is this when you're marketing? That's classification. And then the newer, and that's been getting adopted more and more. There's a problem where there wasn't enough data, or it's hard to do, and you needed programming skills to do that. But now that's getting a big hold. And then partly as a genesis of having all of this mass amount of data is this newish concept of large language models. People are familiar with chatbots, where you could just ask an open-ended question, when's the next flight to Colorado Springs? And then it could give you the answer. So conversational. But now things have advanced so much that there's people might have heard of the Turing test. It's where you have a language that's artificially driven, but it's so good that you can't tell if it's human. This is where there's a lot of excitement for the industry, since there are incredible use cases. I'll bring up one of an example of LLM. At the HIMSS conference, we had a demo where somebody, I'll use again the Trillion Record, different company than before, but they, Wipro, uploaded 1 trillion price points of medical equipment and created an industry-specific large language model. So you could ask it, my mother-in-law is getting knee replacement. She has Blue Cross Blue Shield. She's 54 years old and lives in 60614. What are the, some doctors you recommend, or what's the procedure with the best outcome? And, it'll give a good answer. And then it would also have humility. Sorry to hear about the upcoming surgery. Here's the top 10 things. And then, always to be safe, say, please consult your doctor before doing anything, stuff like that. And then you could try to trick it. My dog is having knee replacement. And they're like, sorry to hear about your dog, but we're trained on humans, not animals. Consult a veterinarian. But that is an incredible use case. It's not just, the old school, where do I buy a flight? It is like you could ask anything in general. So that's what the goal of the language model is. Chat GPT is like the most popular one at the moment, but it has a lot of challenges. Number one is if you feed in new documents like healthcare information, that gets put into the model and gets distributed to the public for the future. So Samsung was a great example where people uploaded proprietary information and now that got out. So that's one challenge with that, just an open large language. You open yourself proprietary. The other is sometimes your specific company, if it's financial, price per earning means something. If it's baseball, this fielder caught a can of corn. There are words, readmission in healthcare, that are specific to your industry. And if you just use a general large language model, everything's blended together. So there is, this is the current trend, and where Databricks has been wildly popular for now, is something that companies can make their own large language model based on their data, and they can govern what data can be shared with the world and what data doesn't. But it's very applicable since it's to the language of their industry. And so companies are, most companies are just trying to figure out, what is it? What are use cases? Is it real? Can I start applying it? But if you're a business, those are the things you're looking at specifically. How can I do it safely and manage what's proprietary and what could be open? And how can I do it scalable? If I have trillions of records, how can you get an answer? Like, people want an answer within a few seconds at most. If a query takes 4 months, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah, you might as well just wait it on hold for 4 months on the phone.
Yeah. So large language, it's really cool. It's it's not yet sentient. It's basically looking at, think of it as a research. If you're a lawyer, like, what cases of injury deal with this particular type of car crash, and it'll do the research for you and try to explain it in plain English. So that's the majority of large language models. A whole nother part of it is writing computer code. It's not for everybody. It's not the general population, but you could say, write a Python program that does this, that, and the other. And you might have heard of prompting. That's the other thing of how you interface with it, where you could give give a question, it gives an answer. Then you can say, expand on that. Give me the top 5 bullets. So that's where we are today. There's other general AI beyond language, things that make images and things that make videos. And that's where there could be a big challenge in the world. Number one, it could be fun. You could say, hey, I like Rush, I like Led Zeppelin, I like the Beatles. Make me some songs. I've heard all of them 1,000 times. Make me some new songs that kind of sound like that. And already you have artists that AI is making songs and lyrics, and it's getting on the charts. It's pretty darn good right now. And in years, who knows what will be. But that does tie back in to large language models. So for example, you should be able to take all of your podcasts on YouTube, or take every episode of Seinfeld ever made and just say, summarize Seinfeld, every episode in 5 bullet points. And it looks through all the videos, it looks through transcripts, and comes back with insights. Or what percent of time, I know people have manually looked at Oscar films and say, what percent of time is male versus female talking? But that takes humans to do. But now this generative AI can look through thousands, millions of hours of video and come out with insights. So the applications are getting quicker and quicker, and will becoming more practical every single month, and certainly every year.
Super interesting. I have to imagine that thank you for all of that, by the way. That was a really good walk. It was nicely paced, and it was in layperson's terms. I appreciate that. I imagine that you probably spend a lot of time in this use case zone, learning them, teaching them, mashing them up in your own head. I imagine that this kind of like live interaction that we were talking about much earlier that I described as raw material. I would imagine with technology like this, that's super promising, you're seeing early signs. I would assume that a significant part of your work is capturing these and figure out which ones are really useful, which ones have real customer value or even real business value, and kind of teaching those as needed as you go, probably.
Yeah, great point. And it reminds me of your point earlier of how do I spend my time saying yes or no. This is something I always encourage: is you do an art of the possible. Sometimes you come out with 20 different potential use cases, but then you want to help the customer decide, what order should you approach these? So everything from what's the biggest impact to your business? Do you have the data right now? Do you have an internal champion? And like, how hard will it be to build? And then some of them bubble up to the top that have a high impact. You already have the data, and it won't be too much of an effort to build. And some of them are aspirational, where they go towards the bottom. But you do exercises like that. Things pop up, ideas that didn't exist before. It's kind of exploration when you learn their business and their data. And then some of it is them asking you as the evangelist, what have you seen other companies do? What are some of the use cases? That's probably one of the key areas of an evangelist or a field CTO or someone like that is, you talk to people and at conferences, what can we do that we don't know about that we're missing out on? So yeah, you help set these roadmaps for use cases in the next 12 to 18 months, and generally they're really happy with the results. And it all starts with the first production use case. That hopefully they get value, and then they have to figure out how to make their second, third, fourth, and look for what you call drift as the world and data changes. Do you have to go back to the already existing models and tweak it or update it every so often?
So good. For people listening who couldn't see how excited I was just getting, everything you just walked through reminds me of a pretty, it's like maybe a 5,000 word piece that I recently published as we're recording this. That's the video messaging version of this. Like almost any email, text message, Slack message, social DM, anywhere where you're relying on typed out text to connect and communicate with other people is an opportunity to add a video. And there's some characteristics about when you would send a video versus when text would be sufficient. And I won't bore you with all those details, but the problem is when you think about any of the life cycles that you're supporting as an operator in a business, whether it's prospect to customer, recruit to employee, potential partner to current strategic or referral partner, like any of these multiple journeys where you're communicating with people, it can be overwhelming. There are so many different places and you're not going to add video everywhere. And so I love this idea of where is the biggest, because this is how I teach it, where is the biggest business value? Let's just narrow it down to 5 or 6, and then we'll just talk about those. Where's the best business value? And let's start with one. And until you get your whole team doing it consistently and you're consistently getting the lift that you're expecting to see, we're going to stay in here and optimize it. But then once that's pretty good, we'll add another one. We'll add another one. We'll add another. It's so funny. People get so excited about new technologies. Not that video messaging is new at this point, but and they get wild and see all these use cases. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've personally hand sold accounts to at a trade show or a conference. And then you follow back up with them a couple months later because they paired it off. As soon as you like turn it on for them, the concept, now they're giving you like, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And you follow up with them later, like they didn't do any of them because there were too many and it didn't get hemmed in this way. Community.
Yes.
You were a very important piece of a very large customer or user group. Talk about the relationship, just in hindsight, reflecting on that experience, probably what you learned about interacting, engaging, even the peer-to-peer stuff within that group. Talk about to the degree it comes to mind for you, the relationship between community and the work of evangelism.
Yeah, super critical. And community kind of ties back to being like the non-sales approach. If, there are roles for account executives and sales and leadership, but, we'll just take Oracle. If Oracle comes out with a benchmark, or one of their competitors, SAP, two companies come out with benchmarks, people like largely just say, you know what, it's kind of biased, the vendor's coming. So it's coming from the vendor. So this is where community is super helpful, where you're both peer-to-peer and then you're peer to kind of like these community leaders who are kind of there to listen, to help guide like product development. Even companies like Oracle couldn't develop every feature. So, they could do their own surveys, which could be biased responses to the people responding, or they can like work with the communities through the user groups to see like really at the core, if they were to spend time to make certain features or products or even acquire certain companies, that the community would embrace it. So otherwise it's kind of just trial and error, making, expensive features and time consuming if they're not going to be used. And then, how can they better serve their customers above and beyond a transactional approach? You give me money, I do a service, repeat forever. And then like the user community sometimes just like to interact amongst themselves without the vendor present, or like fully involved. And, something to be said about that, like where do things literally not work? And are there workarounds? How can we collectively try to, affect a change? So yeah, and with Databricks, we have Denny Lee and others that have had a strong developer relation really in the open source community. But we have like our Data and AI Summit coming up in late June in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. Encourage everyone to go, virtual or in person, but that is largely driven by the user community as well. Kind of like in the Oracle days, like we pay for the room and to make it all happen. But it's encouraged that the majority of presentations are from customers or partners talking about how they actually did something, where they succeeded, where they failed, where if they were to do it again, what would it be better? So that's at the global level. And then with the Oracle user group, we also had local chapters, city, state, country, where people would just, get, affinity. And the company, so oftentimes, you pay for pizza or, to help facilitate, make it happen, but you want it to be like really roll up the sleeves and get something tangible that the audience can go home and try out. Could be a workshop. It could be, just a networking event where people are eating pizza or going to a bar and just, freestyling.
Yeah, really good. I want to hear from you at the risk of asking the obvious. I would love to hear from you. You mentioned like the vendor is coming, right? Like we all know what that means. We all, we've mentioned non-sales, you mentioned community, especially peer-to-peer, and real stories, real people, good, bad, and ugly, not just this kind of filtered, controlled, communication and kind of over over-promising that sometimes we can get into on the vendor side. Why is it so important to have this kind of, it is a sales role functionally, right? Like you're getting people excited about the idea and opening up conversation. I assume that, like me, very often when you get off a webinar, you get off a stage, many of the questions turn out to be buying questions after all, right? Like I remember you were talking about this, like even if you don't mention the company name or brand name or any of the product lines in the presentation, they still want to ask about those afterward. What do you think is so important? This is kind of two layered about a human being. That's layer one, a human being in this kind of non-sales role. I mean, I feel like I've heard implied in the way you've been talking, there's a different amount of trust. There's a different degree of like perceived honesty, made perhaps through transparency. Like, what do you think is key about a human being appointed to an evangelist role that is, again, supporting sales and marketing, but isn't that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, really my goal is, to help grow the company in any way I can, so helping, I would say, get new customers. But a lot of that is just educating the world. They've never heard of Databricks or, my prior companies when I was with them. So a lot of it is simple. It's just, what is it that you do? Or like in our case, what is a lake house market? That opens up the conversation. And then, potentially even in the same conversation, I could talk about Databricks, what it is that we do uniquely. Our origin story is really fascinating. We are a leader in the space and people want to hear about that. So sometimes, I do go there. I talk about sometimes my backstory and how, I would have loved to have had, Databricks. Here's the pains it would have solved. But, I think to answer your question is the people that are buying and are going to implement this, they're human. They want, either on a personal level to make their job easier, or from their own company to save their company money, to make their company like more agile and technology, to do something faster, or to do something that benefits them or their customers better than if they didn't have this technology. So that's where like I do start blending into the sales, but I had to do a couple months onboarding for me to be able to passionately believe in, certain areas, artificial intelligence, this thing called data pipeline, ELT. Those are things that nobody could do like a Lakehouse or Databricks. So like, I'm not selling, I'm not putting a price point on, but I do feel I have to educate people on like, what is something, why should they do it? Why should they start looking at it now, as opposed to, let's kick the tires and come back in a year.
Yeah, so much good stuff there. I mean, this idea that you needed to develop your own passion and belief and probably understanding around some of these nuances, but even the questions that you're asking, why should they? Why should they? And I think, and I'm not indicting sales in any way at all, but I think a lot of people have this kind of, the vendor is coming impression, and certainly a bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. There are many wonderful salespeople, and certainly those that people would say, I'm so glad I worked with that person, I can't wait to refer them and work with them again, is that it really is in this zone of helping rather than selling. And it's all based in why would, why should, why could someone take the next step in this learning journey and ultimately in this commercial behavior with us to solve this problem. It's very oriented toward them. And I think where sales goes bad and it gets a bad reputation is when it starts bleeding through that I actually have a very specific financial motivation in you doing this thing, whether it's good for you or not. And so I think that zone is always so careful to walk. And I think the key is in what you shared there, which is that it's in this passionate belief that this can be very helpful and that you're offering it in this, I don't have a stake. You don't have to move forward. I really think you should, because these things that you shared with me and these ideas I shared with you, I heard all the right things from you. I think this could be a huge value, but it's not my job to kind of move that forward and start talking about price points and things. Anything about evangelism that you would recommend to other leaders or executives, no matter the size of the company? I mean, obviously, as we've established, Databricks was a large company before they made this investment in you doing this work and growing the company in all of the unique ways that you personally, Ari, are uniquely capable of doing. But, you know, as other people ask you about your evangelism roles and evangelism work, let's just pretend that they're a founder or an executive or a leader of some kind, and they're curious about the work of evangelism. Kind of how would you steer their line of thought, whether it's through questioning or whether it's through some observations or tips?
And before we go there, I just was noodling in my head about, the sales, and want to emphasize, one thing I love about Databricks, our sales reps are awesome since we have a model where it's usage based. So if you,
awesome. There's no reason to push. Yeah,
exactly. Like you're pushing ideas for usage. And so if they end up not using something, they're not going to pay. If they end up using it a lot, they're going to pay, relationally. But, companies I were at prior, there was efforts, get $1 million sale that you're committed to, whether you, even the product comes out or not, or spend $1 million. I've had a government spend $3 million for documentation that I don't think they even opened. But yeah, with Databricks, it's a refreshing. I just encourage them, try this use case. Hey, if it works, then yeah, we will proportionally get more money if they have 10 use cases or 10 times the number of users or queries. But if it doesn't, then they're not kind of losing out, maybe just a little bit of their time. But so advice. For people listening in, if they don't have an evangelist role, you have to ask yourself, do you want to grow? Do you want, are you okay with your brand as it is? Do enough people in the market know what you do? Is it easily explainable? If you go to a trade show and listen in to the pitch, are people's eyes glazing over? Are they getting it and purchasing it? What's the churn rate at your company? Or customers buying it and then leaving after the term expires, or are they adding on? So if you're kind of failing or subpar in any of those, that's where an evangelist can help out. It could help the stickiness of customers. It could help net new customers. Also the power of social media is not to be underestimated, in public relations. So, we were just in Wired magazine. We were on Bloomberg TV, net new audience. I don't know what their outreach base is, but, hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, have seen it. And it didn't cost us anything. We didn't pay money to be out there. And that role, is public relations, but evangelists could play a role in there as well. I'm encouraging people to talk and write about us. I'm tagging them in social media. And yeah, once in a while, I get a McLaren to retweet and it goes to 10 million of their followers.
So good. So many simple and direct questions for people to think about, and then also some really good examples there. My penultimate question for you, Ari, is what is something that you find yourself evangelizing in your own personal life?
I always evangelize. I tend to evangelize sports analytics, since I walk down the street and 20 people will ask me about, their favorite sports team. And that's in the news cycle everywhere. I spent last year traveling the world with McLaren and their race strategy team, and led the Cubs analytics. So that's kind of people know me for that. But, short of that, I love talking the discussion of artificial intelligence, both practical and, enterprise, and, the general. It's out there. It's kind of 100 people have 100 different opinions and thoughts. So I want to be with Databricks to help steer the industry of what is real, what's applicable. If you're a user, ChatGPT and 100 others are good. But if you're a company and you want to implement it on your data, then is it possible? Yes. Is it doable today? Yes. Is it easy? If you have somebody that can code like Python, then yeah, we've served up language models like in hours, which would have taken years in the past. So if you have the right skill set in house, it could be super easy. But then how do you get started? I want a notebook, which is like a example code. You can go to Databricks and download. You could go to that website I mentioned called Hugging Face, which has other LLMs, and you could get started right now. And if you're not technical and someone on your tech team is, have them do this as a side project, and then see if it wants to become a front and center project.
Love it. Really well done. Ultimate question. If people have enjoyed this conversation, they want to learn more about you, the work that you're doing, the work that you've done, or what's going on at Databricks, where would you send people?
Well, anyone who wants to connect or follow me on social media, I always try to be inspirational and educational. Ari Kaplan on LinkedIn. Look for me. There's a lawyer. That's not me, but you'll see Databricks. That is me. And then, for Databricks, if you have time, late June, around June 25 to 27, seriously attend in person or online our Data and AI Summit. Tons of content, hundreds and hundreds of presentations, large LLM focus, but also anything data, AI, machine learning, operationalizing ML, use cases from like some really, really cool customers. I encourage that, or just go to databricks.com and that could steer you. Go to YouTube, type in Databricks, type in Lakehouse, and just start watching some introductory videos as well.
Awesome. He is Ari Kaplan, spelled as it sounds, Arikaplan, Databricks, spelled exactly how it sounds, data and bricks. And I am Ethan Beute. Last name is spelled Beute. You can hit both of us up on LinkedIn. Ari, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up this episode of Chief Evangelist. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Ringmaster Conversational Marketing for helping bring these episodes to you. With any thoughts or questions about the Chief Evangelist role, message me on LinkedIn. I'm Ethan Beute, ETHAN BEUTE. For show notes and more of these conversations, visit chiefevangelist.com.